Hey, everybody, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. So glad you are here. We're in Season 10 of the podcast, which means we've got over 335 episodes or something crazy like that. So glad if you've been with us, one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning of this podcast. So glad this continues to add value to your life and your work. If you're new to the podcast, again, there's 335 episodes or something at this point. So all you got to do is Google my name, Jason Barger, and whatever you're looking for as it relates to leadership, culture, accountability, mindset, emotional intelligence, whatever it is you're looking for, and chances are you're going to find it. You're also going to stumble into some amazing chats like the one we're going to have today with friends and thought leaders from around the world talking about leadership and culture in their own lives, and I hope you will check those out as well. I'll also throw out a shout out to anybody who's new to the podcast. We just were recognized by Million Podcasts, an organization that we didn't know this was going to happen, but we were recognized as one of the top 70 authentic leadership podcasts in the United States. We actually came in at number 13 in the U.S., which was an amazing thing, and more importantly, amazing because the word authentic was in there. Talking about authentic leadership and culture in the world today, to be recognized that, I just share that with the listeners. Thanks for being a place that every time we record one of these, we want this to be a place for you to step back in your own life, to hopefully have some good oxygen breathed into you, and to think about that temperature that you're aiming to set in your life and your work. So glad that you're here, and today's episode will be no different than that. If you'll do me the quick favor, of course, I keep being reminded of this, that we got to remind people to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that. Rate the podcast 5 stars, of course, on whatever platform you're on. We've been told that this is really important these days when in AI, chatbots and all that. Leave an authentic review in your own words. If something resonates with you, share it, and in your own words, and that's helpful. And then lastly, every time you share this podcast or an episode with the people around you, whether that's on social media or with your colleagues or team at work, just say, hey, let's listen to this episode and think about how it relates to us and what the culture that we're trying to create. That's obviously how these messages are amplified in the world. So thanks to everybody that takes a moment to do that. I am very excited to invite my guest for today into this chat in just a minute. Owen Fitzpatrick, CSP, is a social psychologist and keynote speaker specializing in the intersection of belief, behavior, and organizational change. As the creator of Belief Leadership, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, and the author of Inner Propaganda, he helps leaders understand how beliefs drive decision-making, performance, and culture. Owen has advised senior leadership teams at organizations like Google, JP Morgan, Pfizer, LinkedIn, and Salesforce. He has spoken in 33 countries and worked with a diverse range of high performers, from billionaires to Olympic athletes. His research explores how belief shapes and often distorts human judgment, drawing from global experiences in complex environments such as North Korea, Rwanda, and Afghanistan. Originally from Dublin, Owen now resides in New York City. For my listeners and followers, you've heard me say over and over again that culture is dynamic, and it's shaped by the way we think, act, and interact. And it begins in our mind. And so I'm excited to talk about the concepts of this new book around inner propaganda and the power of the stories we tell ourselves. And even better to have Owen Fitzpatrick as a guest on the podcast. So the Thermostat Podcast with Jason Barger welcomes Owen Fitzpatrick.
Thank you so much, Jason. Real pleasure to be here, and congratulations on that amazing achievement with regards to that list. And the word authentic, I think, speaks volumes about the podcast and about the great work you do. So again, congrats to you.
Thanks, man. It came out of the blue, and we weren't gunning for it, looking for it, which is even better. So
oh yeah.
Anytime the word authentic is given to the work that we're doing around developing people and culture, like we will embrace that for sure. So excited to talk to you, though, today, and to bring your language and the great work that you're doing into collaboration with this kind of work, and the listeners hear what we're doing. But before we do that, just if you would, to give my audience a little something that they might not know about you, what's something beyond that great bio I just read? What's something about just you as a person that we wouldn't know?
Well, something that you might not know is I also have done quite a lot of stuff studying screenwriting, and I've actually won a few awards at short film festivals. But I love writing stories. That's the main thing that I spend a lot of time. The book, as you'll know, Jason, is full of different stories from different parts of history and business. And it's the craft of stories that I'm obsessed with, how you can grab people's attention, invite them in. And a lot of the work I do as well is helping leaders to be able to master the art of using stories to communicate data or to communicate insights or to influence others. So that's kind of something I suppose been living in New York for 6 years. I've traveled quite a lot to just over 100 countries you mentioned, and made every cultural mistake that a person could possibly make in all those places. I'm like, if you've ever seen Indiana Jones, I wish I was like Indiana Jones, but he has this friend Marcus, and there's one clip in one of the movies where he turns around and he goes, you're talking about Marcus. He's been in everything. He can speak a dozen languages. He does this and this and this. And he lists up this guy as being impossible to find. And then it cuts to Marcus and he's like, hello, can anybody hear me? And does anyone speak English? And that kind of reminded me, unfortunately, of myself. So that's kind of, I don't know, probably not sharing the best side of me, but, that's probably more accurate.
Hey, in the spirit of authenticity, buddy, that's great. And, we share that for sure. I love to travel. I've been fortunate to, similarly travel for my own interests all around the world, but then also to get to speak and connect with places, all over the world to talk about this stuff is so great. And I am a storyteller at heart. And so to see the way that stories captivate people's minds and hearts and the way that it moves us all forward is just so wonderful. So you're on the Thermostat with Jason Barger podcast, and so I need to start out by saying, and again, this is going to be a great lead into all the stuff we're going to talk about here in just a second about your book and the work that you're doing, but we talk about understanding and having clarity around what is the temperature that you aim to set. I'm interested in your own life and kind of where you are in life in your career. How would you articulate again, we're all imperfect humans, but what is that temperature that you aim to set when you show up in your, not just your work, but in your life?
Well, I think if we're measuring my life currently, I would say it has to be, extreme fever, right? It's, whatever, 103 or whatever it is. No, it's just because there's an awful lot happening with regards to the book. My book is launching in August. So getting a lot of, sort of pre-orders, a lot of work at the moment. And there's an awful lot happening personally and professionally for me currently. So I'm definitely in a situation where things are extremely, hot at the moment. Yep. But I guess the real trick is, and again, this is something based upon a lot of the work that you would talk about, Jason, is when we talk about creating culture, to your point, it's not just culture in an organization. It could be culture in your family, culture in your marriage. But there's also the culture of the actual place that I'm showing up. So as a speaker, when I show up to an audience, there's the culture of that particular audience. And my goal and our goal is when we show up to ensure that we are hitting the right spot for them. So how do you create the right kind of environment, the right kind of, as you would put it, actions and interactions, and as I would put it, the right kind of stories and behaviors that would cultivate the right kind of experience for them. So regardless of what's going on in my life, there's what I'm handling myself, and then there's when I show up, what I'm connecting with in terms of the folks that I'm working with. And one of the things that travel does to you is it forces you so much outside of your own beliefs and convictions about what normal is. And I think that's really a rich sense of insight that helps you as a leader, because when you recognize there's a totally different way of not just doing X, but like living, it really forces you to start to challenge the assumptions that you have. So when it comes to the temperature, what I try to do is I'm always focusing, to the best of my ability at least, on what is the temperature I need to set with the person that's in front of me, with the audience that's in front of me, with the client that's in front of me, or even, with my partner or with my family. And I'm not always 100% on that. But I think, to me, I always measure it in terms of the culture inside me and the culture outside me. And the culture inside me, when there's a lot of chaos, that's about me managing my mind, handling what I call my inner propaganda. And then there's the culture outside of me, and that's more what I call belief leadership, the ability to manage and influence and impact and cultivate the right kinds of beliefs in the folks that I work with every single day. And so it's always those two areas, or those two sort of thermometers that I'm kind of focusing in on. And the more they align, the better things go.
No, that's awesome. It's beautiful. It's why we've connected, man, because even that language around, we're always taking the temperature, right? And if you really break down emotional intelligence, to think about it starts with understanding of ourself, right? And we're going to talk about that inner propaganda here in a second, but that taking of can I take the temperature even of myself, but then also of that person that I'm with or that audience that I'm speaking, and that it's not about me, but it's about where is it that they are? Can I take the temperature? And then more importantly, then what am I going to do in my behavioral response to set a temperature that's in alignment with that person and those values that I want to be a part of? And to not just get caught in this kind of thermometer reactionary thinking, but to be proactive. And he or she who aims at nothing hits it every time. So what is it that we're aiming for? And we're all imperfect. Of course, I'm imperfect as well. But if I don't have any if I don't have any idea of what I'm aiming for as a father or as a husband or with that group that I'm speaking to, if I don't understand what it is we're trying to do, then I'm more likely to fall into that kind of reactionary thinking rather than this kind of proactive thermostat kind of thinking. And what is honored will be cultivated. You use the word cultivate. So like we together are going to honor something and in this moment cultivate an experience based on what we both bring to this conversation. And there's power in that. And so, let's start with your book, Inner Propaganda, which is called Inner Propaganda, Leading Hearts and Minds Through Turbulent Times, which, again, I'll keep saying this comes out in August, and we'll return to that in the show notes and all that as well. But give the audience a quick description of what you mean by this idea of inner propaganda and why you chose to write this.
So when I was a teenager, I struggled a lot with my mental health. I was suicidal for a while. And there was a moment where everything changed for me. I was writing actually a suicide note, and I wrote a question. And the question that I wrote to myself was, I was saying things like to my parents, I was saying, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. And then the question that I automatically wrote, which I don't know where it came from, it said, is this how much you love them? So like a sarcastic sort of question. So this is how much you love them? You're willing to do this? And then that started as sort of a story war inside my head where it was like the good and bad voice, the whole, the devil on your shoulder and the angel. And I just found I was writing the to and fro, like back and forth between the two. And eventually that question was the one that kept coming back and kept affecting the way in which I felt. And it changed my belief. My belief went from, I believe I need to die, I just can't deal with this anymore, to I believe I need to live no matter what. And it wasn't that my whole life changed in that moment. It didn't. But I didn't do what I was going to do. And that drove me on a sort of odyssey towards trying to understand, why do we believe what we believe? How did my belief change so dramatically? Right? Because logically, we always know the reasons why you should, the reasons why you shouldn't. But logic wasn't enough. Logic didn't do, if logic was the deal, it would have sorted me out a long time before that. And so I wanted to understand why and how beliefs worked. So I started studying everything I could get my hands on. From psychology, became a psychologist. I worked as a therapist to help people to transform their beliefs. I went to India. I studied, under gurus and tried to understand how they cultivate. I even did my master's thesis on the guru factor, which is how gurus cultivate beliefs. I traveled to North Korea, experienced propaganda there, traveled to Iran, traveled to, Afghanistan, Rwanda, and did some research about the genocide. And through all of this, I expected to understand the dynamics of how we're persuaded, how persuasion works, how beliefs change. But what I realized was that the most dangerous lies don't come from the screen. They come from the mirror. The dangerous lies weren't the ones just that, everyone was believing. Of course, they're very dangerous. Of course, you take Rwanda and, estimates are 1 million people died within 100 days in one of the most tragic experiences of human history. But if you look at it overall, so many people die from suicide. So many people's lives are ruined because they sabotage themselves. And even from a business perspective, we sabotage a lot of the decisions. We make poor decisions because of, how we feel, because of our identity, because of confirmation bias, because of motivator reason, because of all these psychological factors that influence the beliefs that we form. And so the big takeaway for me, and the reason I wrote the book, was because the most powerful propaganda is not out there, it's in here. And that helps us in two ways. Number one, it ensures that we can avoid our own limiting beliefs, our own, dumb takes on situations that can prevent us from being the best leaders we can. But also, number two, it can protect us from the outside. And it can protect us from the myriad of different attempts to persuade us that is happening in the media, social media. AI now is programmed to know how to manipulate us. I want to protect people from that. I know the tricks. I know how they work. This is all I've done for 30 years has been diving in, studying how are we manipulated by ourselves and others. And once you understand the way your brain works in this way, and once you understand how you're influenced by others, you can protect yourself from yourself and also from the outside forces as well. And that's kind of the journey I'm on. I see this, the book is just part of what I want to create, which is, it's ambitious, but I want to create a sort of a revolution where we start to turn inward and we go, okay, I can't control the propaganda that is assaulting the world right now, but I can control what I do. I can't control the division or the polarization that is being pushed, and there's a business model behind. But what I can do is I can do my best to turn around and try to connect with and understand how I and the person across the aisle from me is being manipulated, so that maybe I can find a way to be able to bridge that relationship. And that's kind of what inner propaganda is about. That's what my life's work is about, what I'm passionate about, and that's why I wrote the book.
I love it, man. And again, to my listeners, this is gonna sound really, you can see why the synergy of these messages, but that's right. I can't control anything that's happening in the world around me, other than my response. And the story, which we're going to talk about, like the stories that we begin to make sense of what's happening around us. But at the end of the day, what is it that I choose to do? What's my behavioral response? I can't control what anyone else is going to do, but what is my response? And the job, the most recent book I wrote is called Breathing Oxygen. And it's, so what are those things that I'm breathing in each day that are hopefully putting me in the best position to be successful? What are the mindsets that I'm giving kind of life to? And what's the toxic, polluted air that I need to get away from and not breathe, because it's not bringing out the best in me? And in the writing of that book, I think it was the National Science Foundation, their research says that a human being every single day has anywhere between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts in an average day. Now, I'll let you listening decide where you fall on the spectrum, if it's 12,000 or 60,000. But what they say is that 95% of those thoughts we have in our brains are repetitive. Those stories that we're continuing to tell ourselves, and 80% of them, they say, have a negative lean to them. And so oftentimes when we're talking about individuals, but also working with teams and organizations, we talk about the mental baggage that we carry. And we talk about the fact that there's typically three types of mental bags that we carry. One is an event that happens to us. The global pandemic happens, and then we still make sense of what is the story we tell about that. But an event that happens that's out of our control. Another mental baggage, the consequence, something we did or handled that we played a role in didn't go the way that we hoped, and then there's stress and anxiety because of that, and how do we make sense of that? And then the third and biggest one is just the stories, the narratives and the thoughts that we tell ourselves each day. Where does this kind of inner propaganda, if it starts with how we control this this thinking around our stories, does any of that, as it relates to the baggage that we carry, does any of that resonate with your work?
It absolutely does. If you take the main thesis in inner propaganda is that in order for a belief to change, it needs to feel right, it needs to fit in, and it needs to make sense. So in that order, so if we look at it, most of the time what we do is we think we form beliefs because we talk ourselves into it, or we use logic, or we use logical reasoning, and we find the accurate conclusion. We walk around in this state of what we call naive realism, what is known as naive realism, where we all think that we're the ones that are the purveyors of the truth. We understand the truth and everyone else is misguided. Maybe one day Jason will get it, but until that day, I'm the one who knows what's true. And we walk around with this kind of arrogant sense of knowing what the truth is, this objective, what I call objective truth. But there's a number of other types of truth out there. There's desired truth, where we believe what we want to believe. There's emotional truth, where we believe what we feel is true. There's past truth, where we remember something in a certain way and we think it happened the way we remembered it. There's shared truth, which is if I agree with a bunch of people about it, then it becomes true. And even though there's only really objective truth, because we talk about it as if these other forms of truth are objective truth, I like to recognize them, because once you know what kind of truth you're working with, it gives you a chance to be able to change it. So let's imagine a leader is trying to get their organization to make the pivot into AI and embrace it more effectively. If their shared truth in the culture of the organization is them telling each other stories as to why AI is coming for their jobs or this or that or the other, or it's overhyped or it's the enemy, then it doesn't matter how much information or data that leader provides them with, they're still going to be sharing those stories. And the only way to change their minds is to change the way they feel and to change how it affects their identity. Because feels right means it needs to feel right, as in the feelings it gives you needs to be either what you want to feel or aligned with what you actually do feel. Fits in means it needs to fit in with your identity, your perceived identity or who you think you are, or your desired identity, who you want to be, or even your social or group identity, which is what kind of tribe you're part of, what kind of group you're part of, the organization that you feel connected to and how you describe that. And that's also influenced by your meaning and your culture as well. But the point is that if it gets through those two gates, then and only then does it make sense. And making sense is when we use logical reasoning, right? Logic is the one that comes in after, emotion and identity have already, eaten and done the dishes, right? Logic comes in and takes the credit at the end of it. So the real trick is understanding if you're trying to influence or impact. And if you take those buckets you gave there, Jason, you talk about, for instance, the events, right? I would also argue that the stories immediately mesh with the events. So the events affect the way we feel, but we interpret them in real time through the stories we tell. They fit into our narrative. And the same is true of our consequences, right? At the time, we have a narrative about the actions we're taking. And then once we get to the actions we've took, then we get the results. Then the results will change the story that we were telling ourselves in hindsight about the experiences. So to me, stories go across everything and they filter the world. And that's why I say, in many ways, inner propaganda is that the stories that we sell to ourselves, not tell ourselves, but sell to ourselves, become the beliefs that we buy into. And so every experience we have, every event we have, every action we take and the consequences of that, that's filtered through the story of what does this mean? And when we extract the meaning, the problem is most of us extract a meaning which disempowers us and disengages us and turns us to, making a poor decision. And once you understand it, you can recognize it's a story, and therefore you have more of a choice as to which stories to buy into.
Yeah, that's really good, man. That's really good. And I agree with you. Yeah, we're always storytelling in our own internal and then also collectively with the people around us. And so you also reference this idea of belief leadership and language and how we describe something. The stories we tell creates how we even think about leadership. But those listeners know, and any of the teams and organizations that I support or have spoken to, they know I talk about how we think about what it even means to lead is going to impact every room and every conversation we have. So when you talk about belief leadership, how does that language start to create a difference in your mind as to what type of leadership you're really describing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100% it does, yeah. People follow plans. People don't follow plans. They follow beliefs, right? Yeah. So if you think about it, how many times have you been in a situation where you said to someone, hey, listen, can you do this? And you knew by the way in which they answered, there was no chance of it happening, like zero chance. You could have put your mortgage on it. There's zero chance this person will do it, even though they said yes. And that's not necessarily always because that's not usually because they're a bad person. It's because they haven't bought in. There's a difference between compliance and buy-in. There's a difference between saying you'll do something and absolute conviction and commitment. And my understanding of how beliefs work suggests that in order for us to be able to change beliefs or influence effectively long term, our goal needs to be not just communicating it clearly, which should be table stakes, or not just having a logical argument, which should be table stakes as to why people should do it. We need to change the way they feel. We need to align it with their identity, and only then will they be significantly more likely to take action and take action significantly. But it needs to be something that almost comes from them. And that means that they buy into the autonomy and they buy into the identity and they buy into how it makes them feel. They need to be aligned on that first. And then, the effective reasoning and the logic will work in their favor. But for me, belief leadership is different to thought leadership. Thought leadership is about coming up with a great new idea that might change your life or might help you improve the way you do things. Everyday leadership is about getting the most out of the folks that you work with. Management is about getting people to do the actions they need to. Belief leadership is about cultivating belief. cultivating belief in you as a leader, cultivating belief in themselves, cultivating a belief in each other, cultivating belief in the idea, the mission, the product, the service, the offering. Cultivating a belief means generating a feeling, because ultimately a belief is an idea we feel certain about. And that word feel is the most important word in the sentence. And we don't often talk about beliefs as emotional. We talk about them as logical. But the reality is that our brains are not optimized for success and happiness. To your point, and you mentioned this earlier, Jason, the brain is optimized for survival. That's why we have a negative tint towards everything, because our brain needs to pay attention. It's called the negativity bias. Our brain has to pay attention to all the potential dangers of what could go wrong. And as a result of that, our brains are in many ways, the way in which they work is beliefs are not factual necessarily, they're functional. They do what they think. Our brain does what it thinks it needs to do to keep us safe, and what it thinks it needs to do to conserve energy. And so it creates for us a reality, which is a simplified version of reality where it's, black or white, yes or no, very easy for us to grasp, which is the coherent stories that keeps things stable. Yep. And most of them are helping us to see the dangers and helping us to go, okay, I need to be protected. I need to be part of a group. And that's where things like groupthink come from. And so all of these factors are ingrained into the very way in which we process reality. Therefore, once more, the more we understand that, the more to lead others, we need to recognize that's what they're going through as well. And the more we understand about what's going on in the dynamics of the brain, the more easily we can influence ourselves and influence others as well. And that's why I say lead hearts and minds. It's you need to lead the hearts and the feeling and the identity, and then you lead the mind, which is, more the, let's say, the logical piece. And then, you lead yourself and then you lead others. That's kind of the way in which we work.
No doubt. And I use that language with every group I'm with as well, is that it is about our hearts and our minds and that connection to it, and how we think about what it even means to lead. This concept of leadership, this word leadership, has been around for so long, and yet what I've found so fascinating, I've asked groups literally all around the world, all across the country. Certainly I've asked them in the Middle East, I've asked it in Europe, I've asked it in throughout Latin America, all over the world. Literally I've asked, tell me the characteristics of the most influential, compelling leaders, and they all describe these feelings and these people that helped them believe in themselves and believe in a mission greater than themselves. And yet, when oftentimes the way we used to talk about leadership, and I think we're learning what more authentic leadership is we used to talk about this kind of top of the pyramid leader that was this, the general, the person that was at the top of the pyramid with the fancy title. And it was all about barking out orders and telling people what to do and stand in line. And yet nobody ever describes the most influential leader in their life that way. Mm-hmm. They describe, and I talk about flipping that pyramid upside down in our own minds and in our own hearts, that what it means to lead is actually to be at the bottom of the pyramid and to think about what does it mean to help connect us to a mission that's greater than us and a belief that we together, it's not about barking out orders and telling people what to do, but it's about coaching and developing the people around us to bring their gifts and skills to accomplish something that we couldn't on our own. And every single person describes this feeling that the person gave to them. So this nuance, but I think is a chasm, is so important of how we even think about leadership. Does that resonate at all?
It does, yeah, very much so. I think the one caveat I'd say is, I think it resonates for great leaders that are inspiring and that do all this stuff. But there's also a lot of very successful leaders that aren't demonstrating the kind of, let's say, positive qualities, and yet they still have a following. All we got to do is, without talking about politics, is just talk in general about politics. And I'm talking for years now. I'm not saying this is just a recent phenomenon. I'm talking about a lot of politicians are, inverted commas, leaders. And so we have to ask the question, right? If what you're saying is true, which I also believe in, so I'm in agreement with you. But if that is true, then how do we account for the leaders, let's say in politics or even in organizations, that don't, necessarily always comply? If you talk, I'll give you a quick example. Years ago,
can I answer
go ahead.
that real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Here's the way I would say it from thousands and thousands of conversations with people all around the world about this. With the way that it comes back to me is we come now. Maybe we need a different word, but we come back to it and say No, because we chase the tangents of, but yeah, what about this person that got all these people to follow them, and they did all these horrible things around the world, and they got all these people to do all the, and so finally we break it down, and it's like, but is that, just because you can coerce somebody into doing something and following you, what I'm hearing from other people is, let's not call that leadership. Let's call it maybe coercion, power, control. Like, have we been able to do that in the history of time? Absolutely. But when we start to unwrap what is the most influential and exceptional form of what we're trying to describe, this kind of leadership thing that makes you want to do more, come out and do more for yourself and for others, nobody ever describes that top of the pyramid kind of leadership. And so I think, again, it's maybe nuanced, but can somebody get somebody to do something and you empower and control and like get results? Absolutely. But what we often see is they leave this wreckage of people's lives behind them in wake.
I think that last bit is the most important piece, because I think, yeah, to your point, this is the kind of North Star of leadership we want. But I'll give you a quick example. So years ago, I was teaching a leadership workshop. A guy came to me at the beginning and he said, look, I know this is going to be a leadership and emotional intelligence. Let me just tell you right now, I don't need it. I've done a leadership survey. It told me I'm an authoritative dictatorial leader, and that's my style, so I don't need to learn any of this soft skill stuff. I said, how's that working for you? He goes, well, the turnover in the team is quite high, and he goes, it's hard to find good staff these days, right? Now, I laughed at the time, but then I said, so, tell me more about your style. He said, well, I'm just like Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs at the time, if you take it, there's a lot of stories going around, especially early on in his career. He was like, really hardcore, like, I want this and stuff, and expected the best. And you hear some, for example, basketball coaches or football coaches or whatever, who are notorious for being like really difficult to live. Alex Ferguson is a soccer coach or a football coach in the UK, was known for this. But they also have the other side. They have the inspiration. And so challenging people and getting the best out of them is something that works, as does inspiring them and stuff. And so the way I always look at it is and it's not a million miles away from what you've just described, Jason. It's ultimately the folks that are leading with power and coercing or forcing or manipulating or lying or deceiving or whatever it is. The reason it works is because it impacts the way the person feels and it connects with the identity. Right? Yep. So regardless of whether or not it's benevolent or good or bad, leadership itself is to a degree agnostic. When we talk about leadership and the kind of leadership to aspire to, we're talking about a more benevolent, start at the bottom, to your point. But the leadership itself, whenever people sort of say, yeah, but what about? My response is, they're still doing what we're talking about here. They're still impacting the way people feel and their identity. So this works regardless if it's done for good or for ill. But the real trick is, to your point, start to look at, how do we do this for good? Because, and this is the last sentence, which I think you really nailed it, it's because of the trail of destruction that happens afterwards. And because that as soon as that person no longer has power, you're in trouble. Whereas someone who's been more benevolent, even without power, they're still going to be a leader. They're still going to be impacting many years from now. But if a person, power rests on belief before it rests on force. And so when you cultivate the belief, and when you're doing so benevolently in a way that's coming from the very best version of you and you're real with it, to me, that prevents that last thing you mentioned in terms of the trail of destruction, which can then create the flip to the other side. Because whenever someone's in power for a while, often it'll go to the other side. It doesn't often go from extreme to moderate. It often goes from extreme to the other extreme. And that's a recipe for disaster politically, but even from an organizational point of view, you go from micromanaging to, chaos. And so it's really critical to recognize that the form of leadership we're talking about is the one where you're cultivating the right kind of belief to empower people, as opposed to, selfishly orienting yourself towards, I want more and more power, because eventually power is going to run out. And when it does, there's going to be a day of reckoning.
That's right. And I think we're seeing that certainly in athletics. We're seeing that in work. We're seeing that in generational trends of what they respond to and not respond to. And again, I've had all the same conversations. We chase all the same tangents, and eventually it comes back to, well, again, not that you can't get results, but what do those results end up in? And so if it ended with the coach that hits a kid and that nobody wants to work for the person anymore. The boss that everybody's like, dear God, get me away from this person. And it leads to just this wreckage in people's lives. And actually, in the end, the results might have been short term, but the experience and the culture long term is that there's high turnover and nobody wants to be there. I would then argue that that's not what people are saying they actually want. And so let's re-engineer how we even think about what that leadership really means at the core of it, and then what is that culture that we're trying to create. And so in culture shaping, again, leading from our own individual belief, but that collective belief of a group of people, I talk about that language helps drive behavior. We got to be able to describe this identity that we have, these things we value. What is it we believe in of how we want to work together and collaborate? How does this sense of belief and identity and language that we bring to those stories, how do you see that helping to cultivate cultures?
I think there's a two-way relationship. So I think culture impacts our beliefs and beliefs impact our culture.
No doubt.
So to me, what culture is fundamentally it's stories that we tell and actions we engage in, right? So the stories and the actions that we use, it's quite a simplified version, but whenever you look around the culture of an organization, the culture of a family, the culture of a nation, it comes down to the rituals, it comes down to the actions, it comes down to the behaviors that you actually see. It doesn't matter what people put on a poster or the website, or, oh, these are 7 values. Whenever people turn around to me and go, yeah, one of our values is integrity. I'm like, tell me a business where integrity is not on the list.
That's
because
right.
every business...
I use that exact same example.
Yeah, every business will say, this is it. And it's like, no, you have to talk about what you stand for. Integrity's table stakes. It's like being out and say, look, just to let you know, I've never killed anybody on a date, right? You don't do that because it's like, of course, right? That should be taken for granted, right? And so what I think is important is that there's the actions we take, but there's also the stories we tell about the experiences and the actions themselves, right? And so the interaction between the folks there, the stories that they're telling themselves about what it's like to work in that organization, that's part of the culture. The things that you reinforce, the things that you celebrate. Ultimately, every time you celebrate a certain behavior, you're telling a story about that behavior. You're saying, we value this particular behavior. And you demonstrate it through the fact that you've celebrated it. So the story is this behavior is good. Like, again, another example, I worked in an organization. They were trying to encourage people to speak up in meetings with senior leaders, right? And it was they speak up, and that was all across the thing. And you saw in every part of the website and right around the corridors of the organization, it was speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up. It wasn't working. You know why? Because and I've talked to the people inside, whenever they tried to speak up, they were like knocked down, right? It was a threat, right? It doesn't matter how many times you repeat it, right? The repetition is not the mother of success in this one case, because something else is repeated at the same time. And what's repeated is the conversation in the darkened corridors. What's repeated is the water cooler conversation. What's repeated is the way a person walks out of a meeting and feels really bad about themselves and talks to their partner at home and feels like resentful against this. This is what we create. And that's based on the way you make people feel. So to me, cultures are impacted by the stories that we cultivate, but also the stories they're telling each other about it. And that comes across by how we make people feel, what actions we take, what rituals we build into the everyday lives of the folks that are there. But our goal is to be able to create that. And to your point, it's setting the temperature and breathing oxygen so that you're repetitively executing on the actions which lead people to experience the feeling to say, this is a place I belong, this is where I want to be. And the more you do that, the more you can then link that with the identity, whereas this is what it means to work for this organization. This is what it means to be a Googler. This is what it means to, be someone who works for Apple. You feel that you are part of the organization. You're proud to be that way. And once you get to the point where you've got folks proud to be part of your company, you're guaranteeing that a large part of the culture is going to be positive, because they're going to be telling each other how positive. And I promise you, they will believe each other a lot more than they will believe you, especially when you're using a lot of corporate language going, we foresee the onward enhancement of the strategic initiatives. Everyone's like, whatever. But the chat where it said, did you see that conversation they had? Well, I went in and had my feedback conversation, and he said this, she said this. They said, like, this is the sort of stuff that makes a real impact, I think.
No doubt. That's why when you talk about language drives behavior, it's one thing to have the poster on the wall, and everybody has it. But the process with your people of identifying, we have to have language that can help articulate, well, what is that line of thinking? If culture starts in our mind, we've got to have language to begin to describe, well, what is that temperature we're aiming to set? But it doesn't stop there. You can't just throw a word up on the wall and say we got great posters. The point is, are our posters in our people? Which means then we start to, by not only the way we think, but the way that our actions and behaviors individually and our collective interactions together, are we creating alignment around this culture of how we show up and the commitment we have with each other. And when it is an alignment, results and performance follows. And when there's a disconnect, in the fancy term cultural dissonance, between what we say and then people experiencing, well, we say that poster's on the wall, but that's not what we do. There creates this dissonance, and it creates this wreckage throughout, and the culture, again, is still being shaped, but it's being shaped around the water cooler. I
very much agree. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, we want our posters in the people. I think that's a fantastic phrase. It could even be a book title. I think it's excellent because it's so strong. It's such an important point, and I love the way you phrased it. But the second thing is, I think the real trick or the problem in a lot of organizations is we stay at a high level, and ultimately speaking, even the word culture itself, a lot of people don't tend to break it down. So the way I like to work on it is with those words. Let's imagine, on the poster, hopefully in the person, we have a word like innovative, right? What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to go, okay, what are the actual what does that look like?
No doubt.
And we want not just to tell them what it looks like, we want them to tell us what it looks like.
No doubt.
Because the more times we hear, the more times we hear from the folks that we lead of specifically what it looks like in a specific real life situation, the more we hear that, the more we're on the right track, because then they're going to use those exact examples with each other, and it makes it tangible. It makes it real. Instead, the mistake I see made is people turn around and go, we need you to be more innovative and more creative and more whatever synonyms can go with creative and innovative. And the people are going, I'm in accounting. What do you want me to do? That's right. What are you saying to me? So unless we make it clear and specific and easy for people to identify the behavior, how are they supposed to do it? And I think that's the beauty of it,
No doubt. That's exactly what we do. And language drives behavior. So we have to, and participate, we have to come up with what is that? What does it look like in action and behavior? And then we've got to use that language as a tool. It's not a poster, it's a tool to say, how do we calibrate our own individual and collective thermostat, that how we just led that meeting was in alignment with what we say how we want to do it, or it was not.
Yeah.
And what adjustments might we make? And that stuff is powerful, buddy. I could talk about this all day long. I want to get to one last question though with you before I see if there's anything that you got for me. Sure. Is you talk about leading through turbulent times. You talked about turbulent time in your own life. That was probably the beginning of this. What would you say, because, mental health and we have been in divided times and challenging places for so many people in the world. Mm-hmm. What would be a quick thing that you would say of what somebody who's going through a dark time right now, what would your advice be to them?
I think there's a couple of things that I would say. The first is that I believe that we all have an inner dictator inside our head, right? It's a double agent that pretends to be for us, but oftentimes it's dictating the way in which reality looks. And our feelings very much affect our entire beliefs. So when you're depressed, it's not that you think negatively, you believe negatively. You see the world in a negative way. You don't say, oh, I'm feeling quite down. You're saying the world is awful, or my life is awful, or I'm hopeful. And I think one of the most important things we can learn to do is stop trusting ourselves all the time. And I know that seems a bit crazy, because obviously we want to trust ourselves, we want to believe in ourselves. But whenever the darkness arrives, whenever you're overly anxious, your brain is already sort of hijacking you into perceiving a certain way of seeing reality. And so when you're going through the tough times, recognizing that the voice inside your head, it might not be true. It may well be, an inner dictator. It might be the liar. Recognizing that when you're in the darkest of times, often that's when the dictator speaks. And I call it a dictator because it's not just an inner critic. We talk about our negative voice like, oh, it's an inner critic. You're very bad at this. And then you argue with it. It's not the way. Anyone who's experienced mental health struggles will know it's not. It doesn't work like that. the voice happens, it's telling you about reality. You buy into it. When I was in North Korea, they didn't question the leader, or at least they certainly didn't do it externally, right? Because whatever the leader said was true. The same is true in terms of our head. We feel it's true. And just recognizing that just because you believe it doesn't make it so, that is one of the most transformational experiences, because it doesn't mean you've got to turn around and think positively. It just means you start to doubt the negativity, doubt the anxieties, and just go, right now I'm going through a storm. Just like the rain falls, eventually the storm will clear, right? And I sometimes think about it like you're in a boat and you're going through a storm and it's rocky and things look dark and things like you feel like you'll never get there. And eventually the storm moves on and the light comes through the seams. And so that's the first step. And then the second piece would be to actively, and you kind of touched on this earlier, in terms of breathing oxygen, but it's to choose where you're putting your attention. The questions you ask yourself determine where your attention goes. Where you occupy your time, not just I'm on social media. What do you look at in social media? If you're looking at politics in social media, or you're looking at people criticizing others, or you're looking at all sorts, don't be too surprised if you feel miserable. But if you're looking at like cute dog videos or comedians or, amazing music or, all this very sort of beautiful sort of videos that make wholesome,
yeah.
Exactly. The wholesome videos. If you're looking at that, it's going to make you feel good. But organize your focus on the questions you can ask. The questions you ask yourself will determine where your attention goes, and where you choose to put your time and energy and effort and mental space. That will determine how you feel as well. Personally speaking, I love reading. I think taking in information and learning from as many different sources as possible is what gives me, I suppose, respite for some of the challenges outside. And so I love to read, not just nonfiction, but also fiction to read a good story.
Well, I love that. The inner dictator, I think, is better language, to be honest. I think it's, again, language helps drive behavior. I think inner dictator tells me more than inner critic. And I think that's really, really good language. And then I also, and my listeners will or anybody who's any company or organization or places I've keynoted or something will know this, that I talk about when you learn how to surf, where you look is where you go. Where you look, your body will follow. And what we give our attention to, what we give our heart to, what we give our eyes to, our bodies will follow. And so whether that's the scrolling, what we're looking for, that's where, and what we give our brains to is where, that's what will be cultivated. So what is honored will be cultivated. So what are we honoring with our eyes and with our time and with our focus? And so I really appreciate those wise words to anybody that's out there struggling, but also somebody who feels great about themselves right now as to what does tomorrow look like. And where we look, our bodies will follow. I'll pause just for a second. I'd like to do this. Are any questions you would have of me, buddy, before we end this conversation?
I suppose just one would be, what is the most important belief that you feel more leaders would benefit from in their organization? Like an idea or belief that if they were convinced of this would actually really make a more positive impact upon the folks that they lead.
I talk a lot about servant leadership, and I believe that it starts with that orientation of just the way that we think about what it even means to lead. And again, the flipping of that pyramid upside down. And do I, even if I am the CEO, the head honcho, the head coach, the department leader, the whatever it is, the father, the husband, like whatever that is, that's the title, if I see that it's about power and control and that I'm supposed to tell people what to do, then that's the way that I'll generally show up. But if I think it means something different, and the most powerful belief is, for me, is do I believe that leadership is about service and is about serving a mission greater than self? If it's about me and just getting as many people as possible to do what I want, then it's about me. If it's about serving a mission or something that's greater than me, then all of a sudden the way I begin to show up isn't about power and control, but that means I've got to build relationship and connections with humans. And I've got to realize they've got gifts I don't have. And so I'm a coach, and my idea is to coach and develop people rather than just tell them what to do. And I see not only is that generationally happening more and more, where younger generations, they're just looking for that kind of mentor and that kind of person in their life that believes in them but is going to walk alongside of them rather than on top of them. I think that orientation is a belief that, in my opinion, also, by the way, generates better results and performance goes up. Mm-hmm. Which does not mean, I don't want to hear it, and anybody that knows me and knows the work that I do within organizations, does not mean that we just walk around and we're nice and we're kind and we just don't ever then talk about, no. The best servant leaders that I've been around that are in the midst of that and view themselves that way are absolutely willing and able to have the courageous conversations that have to take place. But there's an alignment around where we're trying to look and what our commitment is together to be co-creators in that future culture.
Love it.
Buddy, this is awesome. I love everything you're doing.
Thanks.
Innerpropaganda.com, I think, is the great spot, if I'm saying that correctly, where people can find you.
Yeah, it's innerpropaganda.com is where the book is. There's also, if you buy it there and you put in your name and email, you get access to a free 90-minute masterclass, as well as a full, detailed workbook or field notes guide that I've provided, as well as I'll be popping into it's a circle community there regularly. And my own website is owenfitzpatrick.com for more information about me speaking and all that. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. I have a podcast called the Inner Propaganda Podcast, newsletter called the Inner Propaganda Newsletter, available on my website. So all of that's there. But the most important thing is the book launching August 4th. And it might have already launched by the time that you hear this. So if it's already out, then hopefully you enjoy it. But it's something I've spent many years on. It's my 10th book, but it's definitely the one that I'm most proud of. So I really hope you find it useful.
Awesome. Well, we're going to put all that stuff in the show notes, and we're going to help you the best that we can, and that's awesome. And by the way, I already look forward to the next conversation we're going to have.
Me too.
So whether that's on your podcast or mine or wherever it is that we can do that together, we only scratch the surface of the things that we can talk about. So I'm fired up about that. So again, thank you, Owen, for being a part of today's conversation.
Thank you very much, Jason. My pleasure.
I hope the listeners, I hope this breathed some good oxygen into you, and I hope it got you thinking in some ways about that temperature that you aim to set in your life and your work, and that inner story that you're telling yourself, that inner propaganda. And is it the inner dictator, or is there a different story that you're hoping to tell and a voice that you're hoping to listen to? And I'll just remind us that where we look is where we go. Our bodies will follow. And so what is that culture that we're trying to create for our own lives, but also with the people around us? And it's being shaped every day by the way we think, act, and interact. So everybody, thanks for being here today. Again, I'll invite you to rate, to leave a review, to share it, to subscribe, all the things. And lastly, I'll just remind you to step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen.